This wasn't actually a question, Bruce, but can you remind me where West Coast came? No, it's okay. You don't need to answer. Let's go.
I thought you were going to ask me about Fremantle.
All right. Well, we've got a lot of questions, and firstly, a number of them fit around one topic, so I'll just kind of package them up. Is this just a message for dads? Given today that there's such confusion around parenting, sexuality, etc., do we need males at all? And what about in a lesbian family? Can you have a close male friend as a substitute?
So the whole message of the Fathering Project is that kids need a father figure. They need a mother figure as well. And what we find is that lesbian couples will go out searching for a father figure. It might be one of their brothers or whatever, because they're aware that kids need a father figure. We make no judgment on the lesbian relationship, but kids need a father figure. It's just a biological reality. So the hardest one actually is when a sole parent mother who's been abused by men says, I'm going to be mother and father. That's actually a harder one, because the kids needed a father figure and she doesn't want one. Very hard to deal with that. We try to help them.
A question, what is the real reason you think mothers typically get it right?
Well, I do think there is a biological reality in the biology of a mother. You know, this bonding hormones and things. There's been plenty of studies on the hormones that cause the milk to be released are also bonding hormones. And I do think there's a biological reality in why mothers are so nurturing and, kids, they're stuck with the kids. It's a beautiful thing to see, really, honestly. You like that one?
Yeah, we've got a few to go. What are your recommendations for engaging dads early on in pregnancy?
Interesting question, Peter, because we are working with Greek Paul and Gala in Perth as antenatal classes and how to get dads just frankly out of the room into talking about what it means to be a dad as early as possible. Fathering Project really only starts at kindergarten and year one. Like, this is unfortunately the first time we can really get to them, and that's where our target is, but we'd love to get to them early, and you really have to get to them through antenatal classes. There's no really other way to do it, and we're doing some research around that as well.
A couple of questions around this theme. We've talked about teenagers. What about later years? Is it too late when they're in their 20s?
Yeah, that's a scary question, because it's never too late, 20s, 30s, 40s. I mean, dads say, what's the point of looking back? Well, there are two reasons, I reckon. The first is, if your son's or daughter's 40, you could still actually apologise to them. That would help them enormously. Say something affirming. You got it wrong, but you loved them. And secondly, you'll be a father figure to all those young blokes who are working with you and your own sons, and, you got to break the cycle. So you got to do it at any age. But there is no denying the fact that the earlier you get into this, the better. I was talking to someone today about dad dates and teenage girls. We both had been doing dad dates with our daughters from, toddler. So when they got to be teenagers and said, can we have a date, it was just natural. Talk about boys, whatever. Whereas, imagine, you had nothing to do with your 15-year-old girl and you say, hey, we've got to go out on a date and talk about boys. I mean, honestly, what chance of that happening? The earlier, the better.
What do you say to fathers who are stuck with guilt about the failure to be good fathers?
Well, you've got to move on from guilt. We made a mistake early in the Fathering Project of talking too much about the problems, and Dad said to us, stop making us feel guilty. That is fine. Give us 5 or 10, that's what I did today, a bit about the problem and then move on to the solutions. K2 and Bus is about solutions. They said, give us something to work with. So dads, if you're feeling guilty, just get up tomorrow and start doing these things no matter how old your kids are. Read the books, get on our website. You can still make a difference.
Do you work with Indigenous fathers? Are there particular suggestions for working in the Indigenous space?
Yes, we have a project with the Department of Aboriginal Affairs, and it's essentially about father figures in the Indigenous culture. Father figures are much more, I guess, powerful than just the dad, and we are working on how to engage father figures so that Aboriginal young people actually have a father figure in their life. Very exciting project.
I recently did a one-to-one road trip with my son to strengthen our relationship, but the whole trip was spent on his phone and social media. Not a great trip.
Yeah, well, so be it. So be it. I mean, it's nice to have ground rules before you start, and one of them would be not to be doing that. But again, it's the fact that you bothered to do it. I mean, I did a road trip from Melbourne after, oh, I shouldn't mention this, I just made a mistake, the 2005 grand final. If I see that mark by Leap and Leo one more time, I'm going to need therapy. It was happened right in front of me and my son. Where was I? Oh, that's right, we did a road trip. And my second son, he doesn't talk a lot, so a whole hour would go by and then he would say something, another hour would go by. But, you know, it's the fact that you bother. That's the point. You're bothering. Don't set the agenda too tightly. You know, let it flow. And if that's what happens, so be it.
But you did say actually in an earlier talk that in that sleep out in Subiaco, no phones were allowed. Is that right?
Yeah, well, that's about setting the agenda in advance. So the sleep out had the phones were only allowed to be used for dads videoing their kids, like saying what they enjoyed about it. But we made a rule in advance so that they would agree, and this is to do with dad as well, no phones, no Game Boys, no nothing. So that's about making the rules in advance of the trip and agreeing to them.
Where does discipline fit in?
So a common question we get is, how can you do all this when you're trying to discipline your child? And I told you about, let's just say, that girl there. She comes in, she's boozy, she's 15. So we have a simple rule about discipline, and there's a way in which discipline can crush a child's spirit and a way in which it can actually make them feel special, and this is it. If you say, you stupid idiot, you've done it again, those girls, they're hopeless, you know, whatever, you let yourself go, whatever. You're stupid, you made a mistake again, it just crushes her spirit. But you can say, you know what, bad luck, you've made the mistake, and you're grounded, exactly, the rules still apply, but look her in the eye and say, you're better than that. I believe in you, you're better than that. Not a good time now to talk, but tomorrow we'll go out for a milkshake and we'll talk about it. But I do believe in you, you're better than that.
But do you believe that the father is responsible when things go wrong, when the child turns into a parent it doesn't work out well?
If a child turns into a parent and it doesn't work out well, it depends on all sorts of things. All sorts of things. The father may or may not be responsible. The statistics we showed you, often though it's only 50%, right? So you can't take 100% responsibility. You're not that powerful. You're just very powerful, but there are other factors in people's lives. So you need to deconstruct every situation and work out how much is your responsibility as a dad, and then you can apologise for that, but if it's not, you can't.
So we've had a couple of questions here from both sides. One, a father who's been estranged from his son for 7 years, not having access, trying to reach out, suggestions, and then now one just came in the other way around from a mum whose access to the son has been cut off, or the child. Do you have advice?
Yeah, so these are difficult ones, and without knowing the situation, I have absolutely no right, I guess, to comment. But the rules that we talked about, being there, unconditional love and making them feel special, apply whether you live in the same house or not. So when we talk to separated dads, we have a bunch of rules, and you can look on the website. If you're in that situation or you know someone, then we have a bunch of rules, if you like, for separated dads. But BUS still applies, being there for them and loving them unconditionally, and, you know, not using them as your entertainment in life. It's too much pressure on the kids if you're hanging out for them to come. BUS applies regardless whether you live in the same house or not, but in terms of lack of contact, I really couldn't and shouldn't comment without knowing the situation.
There's been a lot of emphasis on girls who are led astray, per your slide today. But what can dads teach their sons, not their daughters, about respecting women and honouring their bodies? Not just being driven by their needs or excusing them as being normal teenage boys. I feel like girls get blamed a lot for what is actually the responsibility of both sexes.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the reason I talk about girls a bit in this sort of talk is I used to talk more about sons, but people sort of imagine that it's a father-son talk. But I wrote a book about daughters and dads, and I realised a lot of dads have no idea what to do with their daughters. That's why we talk about daughters, not to de-emphasise sons. But absolutely, a father is very powerful in teaching boys attitude to women. Very powerful. And I really feel like, as a man, it should not be left up to women to clamour for that. It should be men leading the way, teaching young boys respect for women right from the beginning, and to never tolerate any disrespect. And that is a whole other subject that we talk about, but I do agree, it is actually dads have a powerful role in that.
How can you know when a moody girl is at risk of serious depression or just a bit sensitive, and when to intervene with professionals?
Another very difficult question. Because every time you get a moody teenager, you imagine they're suicidal. So that's the fear, because you know that that's a risk. So, the specifics of whether someone really is suicidal. I mean, the frightening thing is when you're not getting any clues at all, I think. I have a particular rule, which is to ask people. Maybe that's the doctor in me, but when I think people are at risk of self-harm, I actually ask them, are you at risk? I say, excuse me, I hope you don't mind, but I just need to know how bad is it, and are you at risk of self-harm? There's a million things I could say about this, but that's actually quite a bold thing to say to somebody. And they're so relieved when you ask them, but you've got to be ballsy about asking, whether you're a man or a woman, asking that.
Perhaps just a couple more. What advice do you have for an aunt or an uncle whose two nephews are lost and making poor choices? The text goes on to say there's been suicide in the family and drug abuse and that sort of thing. So advice for an auntie and an uncle.
Yeah, so as you might guess, the advice is pretty much K2 and bus, whether you're an aunt or an uncle. What makes a difference? Well, I ask you the question, if you're an uncle, what would make your nephews or nieces put up their hands in 20 years' time, and just think through what I said about parenting, and you'll immediately get the same thing about parent figures. You can't do it quite as intensely, of course, but aunts and uncles, right from the beginning, be the voice in their head, especially if they don't have a dad. And do something special with your nephews and nieces. And I don't know the situation from the question, Peter, because maybe if you don't already have contacts, it's kind of hard to get it. It's much easier, like the earlier question. Start early on, and you've got much more chance.
There have been a couple of comments and a question here about whether there's a strong correlation between fathering and criminal offence and imprisonment, incarceration.
That's almost a Dorothy Dix. And I'll tell you, I'm a bit obsessed with making sure that everything we say in the Fathering Project is backed up by statistics. So I was talking at a breakfast, and on my talk there was a table, and someone asked me about that question actually. And I said, 85% of adolescents in jail in Western Australia, according to the Bureau of Statistics, don't have a dad. And the guy next to me said, rubbish. I said, I thought, been caught out here, but hang on, I quickly retraced my steps. I said, actually, I just got these statistics from the Bureau of Statistics. He said, I'm a prison warden. It's not 85%. He said, I reckon it's 98% of those kids. I don't know where your other 13% came from. It's rubbish. Almost none of those kids have a dad in their lives. And I'll tell you one other thing. The Director General of Prisons in WA was chairing a Fathering Project session at his school, and he said, because he runs all the jails, he said, if and when the Fathering Project succeeds, I will be done out of a job.
There's a question here I thought would be good. I just lost it. Oh, here it is. How do you help the dads to get in touch with their feelings and start to talk about real emotions? What difference can this make?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think dads don't come to this very easily. I think in the church it's much easier, to be honest. That's my observation, but I think it's pretty hard for a wife to to get a husband to open up. I actually think it's much better when other blokes do it. So with these champion dads groups, like for example on Subiaco Oval, they come inside and they do all sorts of things and they start talking to each other. And I think men who start talking to each other realise that, you know what, if you talk about how you're struggling, no bolt of lightning comes out of the sky and vaporises you. It's actually quite a good thing to do. And there's a way, I don't know, maybe men have always succeeded in doing this more. I mean, you know how they say there are never any secrets in the trenches. There's something about if men can just get there, they can really help each other. And that's been my observation too, that men are the best ones to help other blokes understand their feelings and their struggles and help to move on. Be better dads, be better husbands, better people, better citizens, better friends, really proper friends, and not just those rubbish acquaintances, my so-called mates who never actually know anything about my life.
I think we're just about out of time. There's a question coming now from the other perspective, advice to sons, particularly in the context of perhaps increasing ambiguity around what is gender and how they will become fathers in decades to come.
Not sure of the question though.
Well, I think you've been I assume the question is asking, you've been giving advice for fathers and mothers as well. What advice do you offer, if any, to sons? And the previous question is, how does this fit in with increasing ambiguities about gender and how that will affect young men becoming fathers in decades to come?
Yeah, it's a slightly tricky question, but I don't see that it is any different to what we've already talked about, really. So kids need a father figure. If that son becomes a father, then kids need a father figure. So that son has to do his best to be a father figure. If that son is gay, if that's what the question is, and ends up in a gay relationship, then, you know, that's something. And again, it's a bit like the discussion about lesbian relationships, which again, we never moralise. We absolutely, as the Fathering Project, never do that. But with laser-like focus, we talk about father figures, and that's what we'd say again. You know, who's the father figure here? And if it's a lesbian relationship, are you, you know, generating a father figure, etc.? I'd think more about mother figures, actually, if they ended up in a male gay relationship who's intentionally making sure that happens.
We might just end with this one. Any tips for being that voice without moralising and judging?
Absolutely. I have a tip, and for me to say this tip, I would like to create a picture for you, which is a bus on top of K2. I don't know if it's come up already, but the thing that worked with Peter Hillary was that he climbed with his dad. If you don't spend time with your kids, you just can't be, you know, you just can't be that voice. You know, kids spell love, T-I-M-E. I mean, it's just the way it is. So it's kind of hard to be, I mean, sons have always learned from their dads by an apprenticeship, whether they're hunting or whether they're farming, shoulder to shoulder. But now you go off to work, you know, you've got to spend time for that apprenticeship. And for a girl, it's a bit different. I have a 3-word tip about daughters and their dads. Read my book.
Fantastic. I'm delighted to have been invited to say just a few words of thanks to our 2016 Smith lecturer, Dr. Bruce Robinson. Bruce, I think we'll all agree that we've been treated to a feast of wisdom and passion and experience and the practical tools to help us better navigate the shoals of that teenage voyage that most of us have experienced in some shape or form. And look, thanks, Bruce, for your willingness to come so far east. The codes are different here, but we're just people just like you. But we are the richer for your efforts. You actually don't know this, but earlier this century, your work on parenthood made a significant personal impact on me as a father of 3 teenage children. I met you briefly 15 years ago, just after Fathering in the Fast Lane came out. And on later reading that new book then, I was particularly struck by your gentle, pragmatic advice about a father's use of his time. And you spoke and wrote of this strategy of what you call flexible work time, where you had this graph, and I can still see the graph on the page, which sort of had bends and holes in the daily time, which said, don't just go to work at 9 o'clock and come home at 5. Work out a way to adjust your working style so that you can be as spontaneous as you can with your kids. And that stuck with me. I didn't do it perfectly with my kids who have all now gone, but it really was something a gift that you gave to me, for which I'm very grateful. I'm also grateful for the countless examples and strategies and tactics that you've given us tonight. I was especially struck, and I made a list of the things. I mean, the K2 effect will stay with me. I'll never forget the bus. I'm going to get on the bus, being there, unconditional love, every child is special. I love the fact that it doesn't have to be Paris. In fact, I was thinking today, I had lunch with my father today, who's 88 next birthday, and I remember clearly when I was about 8, he took me to Oberon and we stayed in the Hampton Guest House, and I thought it was Paris. I've driven past it recently. It's an absolute dump, but he took me, we stayed overnight. I mean, it's absolutely proved what you say. We could go on, so many examples. So, Bruce, tonight you've more than honoured the calibre and the depth of the Smith Lecture tradition. I feel sure that the honourand of this series, Bruce Smith, whose own unique contribution to social ethics and the Christian mind continues to inspire us, even in this, our 16th gathering in Sydney. He'd want to say with us, well done, encore, thank you. And so, ladies and gentlemen, please join with me, with Peter and Greg, and this growing Smith Lecture constituency to sincerely thank Dr. Bruce Robinson.
Thanks, everyone. We've got one delightful duty left, and there's a tradition in the Smith Lecture to give a gift to the lecturer. So please, if you'd come up, Bruce, and invite Andrew Smith on behalf of the family to come up and deliver the gift.
One of the things I find helps me in parenting is a good bottle of red wine and a good block of chocolate. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you, man.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.